It was almost midnight when Dr. Lisa heard the ambulance sirens getting louder outside the hospital. She had been working for 12 hours straight, but that was normal for her. As an emergency room doctor, she was used to long shifts and strange cases, but nothing had prepared her for what was about to walk through those doors. The paramedics rushed in with a man on a stretcher. He looked like he was in his early 30s, but something about him seemed different. His skin was unusually pale, almost like he had never seen sunlight. His clothes were torn and dirty, as if he had been lying in a field for hours. "We found him about 20 miles outside the city," one paramedic explained. "A farmer saw him lying in his field and called us. No identification, no wallet, nothing. He's been unconscious the whole time." Lisa nodded and quickly began her examination. The first thing she noticed was how cold his skin felt. She checked his temperature and frowned. It read 94 degrees. That was too low for a normal person, but he didn't seem to be in any danger. His pulse was strange too. It was strong but had an unusual rhythm, like his heart was beating to a different tune than everyone else's. Lisa had been a doctor for 8 years and had never seen anything like it. When she drew blood for testing, something else caught her attention. The blood looked normal, but when the lab results came back an hour later, she had to read them 3 times to believe what she was seeing. His white blood cell count was incredibly high, but he showed no signs of infection. His oxygen levels were so low that he should have been gasping for air. Yet he was breathing perfectly fine. Around 2 in the morning, the man suddenly opened his eyes. Lisa was checking on another patient when she heard a nurse call her name. Urgently, she rushed over to find the mysterious patient sitting up in bed, looking round the room with the most curious expression she had ever seen. "Hello," Lisa said gently. "I'm Dr. Lisa. You're in the hospital. How are you feeling?" The man looked at her with eyes that seemed to hold depths she couldn't understand. They weren't just blue or green or brown. They seemed to change color, slightly depending on how the light hit them. But more than that, there was something ancient about his gaze, as if he had seen things that others hadn't. "I feel different," he said slowly. His voice was clear, and he spoke perfect English. But there was something in his tone that suggested he was thinking carefully about each word. "Can you tell me your name?" Lisa asked. The man paused for a long moment, as if he was searching through his memory. I think it might be David, but that doesn't feel right somehow." Lisa made a note on her chart. "What about your last name? Do you remember where you live?" David shook his head slowly. "I remember fragments, pieces of things, but nothing that makes complete sense." What happened next made Lisa pause. David was staring at the fluorescent lights above his bed with the same fascination that a child might show when seeing fireworks for the first time. He reached up toward the light, not to touch it, but as if he was trying to understand how it worked. "These lights," he said, "they're so bright, but they feel artificial, not like real light." Lisa found this comment strange. Of course, hospital lights were artificial. Everyone knew that. But David seemed genuinely surprised by this fact. Over the next few hours, Lisa found herself coming back to check on David more often than her other patients. There was something about him that she couldn't shake. Every time she entered his room, he was doing something that seemed perfectly normal, but felt completely wrong. She watched him touch the metal rail of his bed as if he had never felt metal before. He would run his fingers along it slowly, with a look of concentration that suggested he was learning something important from the experience. When a nurse brought him food, David stared at the plastic cup for several minutes before asking, "What is this made from?" The nurse laughed and said it was just a regular cup, but David continued examining it like it was the most fascinating object he had ever seen. But it was during his physical examination that Lisa discovered something that made her heart race. She was checking for any scars or marks that might help identify him. When she realized something impossible, David had no appendix scar. That wouldn't be unusual, except that when she felt his abdomen, there was no appendix there at all. It was as if he had been born without one. She checked for vaccination scars on his arms, the small marks that everyone has from childhood shots. Nothing. His skin was completely smooth, without the tiny imperfections that come from a lifetime of normal human experiences. When she looked at his teeth, she found dental work that didn't match any technique she had learned about in medical school. It wasn't that it was poor work, quite the opposite. It was perfect in a way that seemed almost impossible. "David," she said carefully, "do you remember anything about your childhood, your parents, where you grew up?" He was quiet for a long time, staring out the window at the dark sky. "I remember feeling different from other children. I remember always being cold when others were warm. I remember seeing things in the dark that others couldn't see." As if to prove his point, David got up from his bed and walked to the window. The room's lights were dim, and the night outside was completely black. Yet he looked out as if he could see everything clearly. "There's a cat in the parking lot," he said casually. "It's sitting by the third car from the left, cleaning its paw." Lisa looked out the window, but saw only darkness. She couldn't even make out individual cars, let alone a cat. But something made her call down to security to check. 5 minutes later, security called back. "Doc, that's weird. There's a cat out here, exactly where you said." "How did you know?" Lisa felt a chill run down her spine that had nothing to do with the hospital's air conditioning. She looked at David, who was now back in his bed, seemingly unaware that he had just done something impossible. As her shift continued, more strange things happened. David never seemed to sleep, but he also never seemed tired. When Lisa checked on him at 4 in the morning, he was sitting up in bed, perfectly alert, watching the sunrise through his window with the same intense fascination. He had shown the artificial lights. By morning, Lisa had made a decision that would change her life forever. This wasn't just a case of amnesia or a head injury. David wasn't just different, he was something else entirely. And she was going to find out what. The last thing that happened before her shift ended made everything clear. Lisa was writing notes in David's chart when she felt someone watching her. She looked up to find David staring at her with those strange, deep eyes. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then David said something that made her hand freeze over her clipboard. "You're different too, aren't you? That's why you can see that something's wrong with me. Most people look at me and see what they expect to see, but you see what's really there." Lisa didn't know how to answer that question, but deep down, she knew he was right, and that scared her more than anything else that had happened that night. 3 days had passed since David arrived at the hospital, and Dr. Lisa couldn't stop thinking about him. She had dozens of other patients to care for, but something kept pulling her back to room 314. Every time she walked past his door, she found herself slowing down, looking in, trying to understand what made him so different. The morning blood work results were waiting on her desk when she arrived for her shift. She opened David's file and felt her coffee cup slip from her hand. The numbers made no sense. His red blood cell count was higher than any human she had ever seen. Yet he showed no signs of the problems that usually came with such levels. His immune system markers suggested he could fight off diseases that would be deadly to most people. But what really caught her attention was something the lab technician had written at the bottom of the report. "Doctor, I've run these tests 4 times. The results are consistent, but I've never seen anything like this. His blood seems to carry oxygen more efficiently than normal human blood, by about 3 times the normal rate." Lisa stared at those words for a long time. 3 times more efficient. That would explain why his oxygen levels seemed so low, but he breathed perfectly fine. It was as if his blood was designed differently. She decided to visit David again, this time with more specific questions. When she entered his room, she found him standing by the window, perfectly still, watching the morning traffic below. What struck her was how he stood, completely motionless, like a statue, for what the nurses said had been over an hour. "Good morning, David," she said. "How did you sleep?" He turned to her with that same thoughtful expression. "I don't think I did sleep, but I don't feel tired. Is that normal?" Lisa made a mental note. 3 days without sleep, and he looked more alert than she did after a full night's rest. Most people need sleep to function properly. "When was the last time you remember sleeping?" David was quiet for a moment, as if searching through his memories. I'm not sure I ever have. I remember lying down at night, but I was always aware of everything around me. The sounds, the movements, even the electrical humming from the walls. Electrical humming, yes, David said, pointing toward the wall where Lisa knew the electrical wiring ran. It's louder at night when there are fewer other sounds. Can't you hear it? Lisa listened carefully, but heard nothing except the normal hospital noises. Footsteps in the hallway, distant conversations, the hum of air conditioning. I don't hear anything unusual. David looked surprised. Really? It's quite loud. And the lights make a different sound than the electrical lines. More of a buzzing. Lisa felt that familiar chill again. She was beginning to understand that David experienced the world in ways that she couldn't even imagine. But she needed to know more. David, I'd like to run a few more tests. If that's okay with you. Nothing painful, just some observations. He nodded, and Lisa began what would become the most unusual examination of her career. First, she dimmed the lights in his room to almost complete darkness. She could barely see her own hand in front of her face. Can you tell me what's in this room? She asked out without hesitation. David began describing everything perfectly. There's a chair in the corner with a magazine on it. The title says Modern Health. There's a water pitcher on the table with about half the water left. Your stethoscope is hanging from your coat pocket. And there's a small stain on your left sleeve that looks like coffee. Lisa turned the lights back on and checked. Every detail was exactly right, including the coffee stain she hadn't even noticed herself. Next, she decided to test something that had been bothering her since the night he arrived. She took a small medical scissors and, with David's permission, made a tiny cut on his finger to draw blood for another test. What happened next made her question everything she knew about human biology. The cut, which should have taken several minutes to stop bleeding, sealed itself in less than 30 seconds. By the time she had prepared the blood sample, there was no sign that the cut had ever existed. David, she said carefully, has this happened before? This fast healing? I think so, he replied. I remember being confused as a child when other kids would cry about small injuries. That seemed to heal quickly for me. I thought everyone was just being dramatic. Lisa spent the next 2 hours testing David's reflexes, his hearing, and his ability to sense things around him. His reflexes were faster than anything she had measured. His hearing was so sensitive that he could detect conversations happening to floors below them, and most remarkably, he seemed to know when she was about to touch him, even when he wasn't looking. It's like you can sense the electrical field around people, Lisa said, more to herself than to him. Is that what it is? David asked with genuine curiosity. I always wondered why I could tell when someone was approaching, even when they were trying to be quiet. As the day went on, Lisa found herself staying longer in David's room than she should have. There was something about his presence that was both calming and energizing. He asked questions about medical equipment with the curiosity of a child, but understood her explanations with the intelligence of a fellow doctor. When she showed him a heart monitor, he studied it for a few minutes and then asked, why does it only measure the electrical activity? Wouldn't it be more useful to also measure the magnetic field changes? Lisa paused. She had never thought about it that way, but he was right. Heart monitors could theoretically be more accurate with that additional information. How did you know that? I can feel both, David said simply. When you put those electrodes on my chest yesterday, I could sense what the machine was measuring, but it seemed like it was missing half the information. That evening, after her official shift ended, Lisa made a decision that went against all hospital protocols. She stayed to run more tests on David, using equipment that she wasn't supposed to access without proper authorization. She tested his vision using eye charts designed for pilots and found that he could read letters that were smaller than what the charts even included. She tested his temperature regulation by adjusting the room temperature and found that his body adapted almost instantly to changes that would take normal people much longer to adjust to. But the most shocking discovery came when she was reviewing the brain scans that had been taken when David first arrived. She had looked at them before, But now she studied them more carefully. His brain structure was similar to a human brain, but there were areas that showed activity patterns she had never seen in medical textbooks. "David," she said, showing him the brain scan images on her computer. "Do you understand what these are?" He looked at the images with the same intense focus he gave everything else. "These are pictures of my brain, aren't they?" "Yes, and they show that your brain works differently than most people's. These areas here." She pointed to the unusual activity patterns. "They're not typically active in human brains." David stared at the images for a long time. "That would explain why I sometimes know things without learning them, or why I can understand how machines work just by being near them." Lisa felt like she was standing at the edge of a cliff. Everything she had observed over the past 3 days was leading to a conclusion that seemed impossible. David wasn't just unusual or gifted. His biology, his abilities, his way of experiencing the world, none of it was human. As she prepared to leave the hospital that night, David called her name softly. "Dr. Lisa," he said, "thank you for not treating me like I was crazy. I've spent my whole life feeling different, but I never understood why until now." Lisa looked at him. This man who could see in complete darkness, heal from injuries in seconds, and hear electrical currents in the walls. A man whose blood carried oxygen more efficiently than any human's, whose brain showed activity patterns that shouldn't exist. "David," she said quietly, "I don't think you're crazy, but I think we need to find out exactly what you are. The way." He looked at her then, with those deep, changing eyes, told her that he had been waiting his whole life for someone to say those words. Dr. Lisa couldn't sleep that night. She kept thinking about David's brain scans, his impossible abilities, and the way he looked at her when she said they needed to find out what he was by morning. She had made a decision that could cost her medical license, but she didn't care anymore. She needed answers. She called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years. Instead of going to the hospital, she went to her apartment and gathered every piece of medical equipment she had borrowed over the years for personal research. Heart monitors, blood pressure machines, even a small device that could measure electrical activity in the brain. That evening, she returned to the hospital and quietly led David out through a side exit. If anyone asked, she would say she was taking him for a walk around the grounds. But instead, she drove him to her apartment. "Why are you helping me?" David asked as they climbed the stairs to her second-floor apartment. Lisa paused at her door, key in hand, "Because in 8 years of being a doctor, I've never seen anything like you. And because I think you deserve to know the truth about yourself." Her apartment was small but organized. Medical textbooks lined the shelves, and her computer desk was covered with research papers. David walked slowly through the rooms, touching surfaces and examining objects with that same careful attention he gave everything. "Your home feels peaceful," he said. "Most places have a chaotic energy, but this is different." Lisa set up her equipment on the dining room table. "I want to run some tests that we couldn't do at the hospital, more detailed ones. Is that okay?" For the next 3 hours, Lisa documented abilities that seemed to come from science fiction rather than medical reality. David could control his heart rate consciously, slowing it down to almost nothing or speeding it up without any physical effort. His body temperature could shift by several degrees just by his thinking about it. But the most remarkable discovery came when Lisa was testing his electrical sensitivity. She had connected him to a machine that measured brain waves when her computer, which was across the room, suddenly started opening files by itself. "David," she said slowly, "are you doing that?" He looked at the computer screen, which was now displaying a star chart program she had downloaded months ago. "I think so. Sometimes electronic things respond to me when I'm not trying to control them." Lisa watched in amazement as David, without touching anything, navigated through the star chart program. Different constellations appeared on the screen as he concentrated on them. "This one," he said suddenly, pointing to a group of stars she didn't recognize. "This feels familiar." The constellation on the screen was labeled as being in a part of the sky that wasn't visible from their location. But David stared at it with an expression of deep longing, as if he was looking at a photograph of home. I have dreams about that part of the sky. He continued, dreams of a place where the sun looks different, where the air feels thinner but somehow better. Where others like me lived, Lisa felt her heart racing. Others like you, in my dreams. I'm not the only one who can see in the dark or hear electrical currents. There are others, and we live in harmony with our environment in ways that seem impossible here. David continued navigating through the star charts, and Lisa noticed something that made her scientific mind struggle to accept what she was seeing. He was finding constellations and star systems that weren't visible from Earth, without powerful telescopes, yet he seemed to know exactly where they were. David, she said carefully, how do you know about these stars? He was quiet for a long time, still staring at the screen. I think I remember traveling past them, not in a ship like humans would build, but in something that moved differently, something that could travel between worlds without the constraints of normal physics. Lisa sat down heavily in her chair. Everything she had observed over the past week was pointing to one impossible conclusion, but her rational mind kept fighting against it. David suddenly turned away from the computer and looked directly at her. You know what I am, don't you? You've known since the first night, but you've been afraid to say it. Lisa looked into those strange, deep eyes that seemed to hold knowledge from beyond this world. She thought about his impossible biology, his abilities that defied human limitations, his knowledge of star systems that shouldn't be visible to him. For several minutes, she studied him in complete silence. She thought about every test she had run, every impossible result, every moment when David had demonstrated abilities that no human should possess. She thought about his dreams of other worlds, his instinctive knowledge of technology, his perfect adaptation to an environment that felt foreign to him. Finally, she whispered the words that she had been afraid to even think. You can't be from Earth. Instead of looking surprised or denying it, David simply nodded. The relief on his face was unmistakable, as if he had been waiting his whole life for someone to recognize what he truly was. I don't think I am, he said quietly. I've always felt like I was pretending to be human, like I was wearing a costume. That didn't quite fit. Lisa felt the world shifting around her. Everything she had learned in medical school, everything she thought she knew about biology and human limitations, suddenly seemed small and incomplete. How is that possible? She asked. You look human. You speak our language perfectly. David sat down across from her, and for the first time since she had met him, he looked truly relaxed. I think I was very young when I came here. Young enough that I learned to be human by watching and copying. But the real me, the part that could never fully hide, always knew I was different. Do you remember how you got here? Fragments, David said. I remember being afraid. I remember traveling through darkness for what felt like forever. I remember being found by people who cared for me but never told me the truth about where I came from. Lisa leaned forward. What people? Do you remember their names? The Hendersons. They lived on a farm about 50 miles north of here. They found me in their field one morning when I was very small. They told everyone I was their nephew, that my parents had died in an accident. Are they still alive? Mrs. Henderson is? She's in a nursing home now. Mr. Henderson passed away 5 years ago. But before he died, he told me something strange. He said they found me next to what looked like a crashed object, but it disappeared before morning. He made me promise never to tell anyone. Lisa felt like she was in a dream. She was sitting in her apartment, talking to someone who had just confirmed that he was not from this planet. Yet somehow, it felt like the most natural conversation she had ever had. David, she said, if you're really from another world, why are you here? Were you sent here for a reason? David was quiet for a long time, staring out her window at the night sky. I think my people were in trouble. I have memories of a dying world, of parents who made a difficult choice to send their children away to safety. I think there are others like me, scattered across different places, all trying to figure out who we really are. Lisa looked at this man who had just revealed the most extraordinary secret she could imagine, and realized that her life would never be the same. She was no longer just a doctor treating an unusual patient. She was now part of something much bigger, something that could change everything humans thought they knew about life in the universe. "What do we do now?" she asked. David smiled, and, for the first time, it looked completely natural on his face. "Now we find the others, and we figure out why we're here." The next morning, Dr. Lisa called in sick again. She couldn't focus on normal hospital work when she had just discovered that beings from other worlds were living among humans. David had spent the night on her couch, though she suspected he hadn't actually slept. When she woke up, she found him standing by her window, watching the sunrise with that same intense focus he gave everything. "I've been thinking about what you said," Lisa told him over coffee, "about the Henderson family. I think we need to talk to Mrs. Henderson." David nodded slowly. "I've been avoiding visiting her because I was afraid she might tell me things I wasn't ready to hear. But now, I think it's time." They drove north for an hour until they reached Sunset Manor, a small nursing home surrounded by farmland. Mrs. Henderson was 87 years old, with kind eyes and hands that showed a lifetime of hard work. When she saw David, her face lit up with joy. But Lisa noticed something else in her expression, a look of sadness, as if she had been carrying a heavy secret for too long. "David, dear," Mrs. Henderson said, taking his hands in hers, "I'm so glad you came. And who is this lovely young lady?" "This is Dr. Lisa," David said. "She's been helping me understand some things about myself." "Mrs. Henderson, I need to ask you about the night you found me." The old woman's expression changed immediately. She looked around nervously, then gestured for them to sit closer. "I wondered when this day would come," she whispered. "Harold made me promise never to tell anyone, but he's gone now, and you deserve to know the truth." Lisa felt her heart racing as Mrs. Henderson began to speak. "It was 30 years ago, almost, to the day, Harold and I were awakened by the strangest light coming from our backfield. It wasn't like lightning or car headlights. It was blue and white, and it seemed to pulse like a heartbeat." David leaned forward. "What did you do?" Harold grabbed his flashlight, and we went out to investigate. "What we found," she paused, looking directly at David. "What we found changed our lives forever." Mrs. Henderson stood up slowly and walked to her dresser. From the bottom drawer, she pulled out a small wooden box. Inside was something that made Lisa's breath catch in her throat. It was a piece of metal about the size of her palm, but unlike any metal she had ever seen. It seemed to shift colors as the light hit it, and there were markings etched into its surface that definitely weren't from any human language. This was lying next to you when we found you, Mrs. Henderson said, handing the object to David. "You were maybe 4 or 5 years old, unconscious, wearing clothes that were made from material we'd never seen before." The moment David touched the metal piece, something extraordinary happened. The markings on its surface began to glow with a soft blue light, and David's eyes widened as if he was remembering something important. "I can read this," he said quietly. It says Journey of Hope in my language." Lisa stared at the glowing metal in amazement. "Your language?" "I remember now," David said, his voice filled with emotion. "This was given to me by my parents before I left. It's not just metal. It's a kind of recording device." Mrs. Henderson continued her story. "There was something else that night. Harold saw the remains of what looked like a vehicle, but it wasn't like any aircraft we knew. It was mostly destroyed, but parts of it seemed to be dissolving as we watched. By morning, there was nothing left except you and that piece of metal. Why didn't you contact the authorities?" Lisa asked. The old woman smiled sadly. "What would we have told them? That we found a child next to a crashed spaceship? They would have taken you away to some government facility. Harold and I couldn't have children of our own, and you needed a family. So we made up the story about you being our nephew." David was still holding the metal piece, which continued to glow softly. "You saved my life. You gave me a childhood when I could have ended up as a test subject somewhere. You were such a special child," Mrs. Henderson said, "always so curious, so intelligent. But we noticed things that weren't quite normal. You never got sick. You could see in the dark. And sometimes you would talk about dreams of flying among the stars. Lisa felt a chill as she realized something important. Mrs. Henderson, has anyone else ever asked about David? Government officials, scientists, anyone? The old woman's face grew worried. Actually, yes, about 6 months ago, some men in suits came by asking questions. They said they were researchers studying unusual medical cases. They wanted to know if we had ever adopted any children or if we knew of any people in the area with unique abilities. David and Lisa exchanged glances. What did you tell them? David asked. I told them nothing, of course. Harold always said that if anyone ever came asking questions, we should deny everything. But I got the feeling they already knew more than they were letting on. Lisa felt a growing sense of urgency. If government agents were looking for people like David, then he was in more danger than they had realized. Mrs. Henderson, Lisa said, is there anything else you can tell us? Any other details about that night? The old woman thought for a moment. There was one thing. Harold found what looked like a small device near the crash site. It was making beeping sounds. But by the time we brought it inside, it had stopped working. We kept it for years, but it never did anything again. Do you still have it? David asked. I think so. It should be in Harold's old toolbox in the basement storage. But David, dear, I need to warn you about something. Those men who came asking questions, they left me their card. They said if I ever remembered anything or if you ever came to visit, I should call them immediately. Lisa felt her stomach drop. You're not going to call them, are you? Mrs. Henderson reached over and patted David's hand. This boy has been like a grandson to me for 30 years. I would never do anything to put him in danger. But you need to be careful. I have a feeling those men haven't given up looking. As they prepared to leave, Mrs. Henderson insisted on going down to the basement storage to find Harold's toolbox. Among the old tools and farm equipment, she found a small device that looked like nothing Lisa had ever seen. It was about the size of a cell phone, but made from the same strange material as the metal piece David carried. The moment David touched it, the device came to life. Symbols appeared on what seemed to be a screen, and it began making soft musical tones. It's some kind of communication device, David said, staring at the symbols. I think it might be able to contact others like me, Lisa realized. They had just made a discovery that could change everything, but she also knew they were running out of time. If government agents were actively searching for people like David, they needed to find the others before they were all captured. As they drove back toward the city, the device continued to make sounds and display symbols. David worked to understand its functions while Lisa kept checking her mirrors, worried they might be followed. Lisa, David said suddenly, this device is showing me locations, places where others like me might be living. Lisa felt a mixture of excitement and fear. They were about to embark on a journey that could reunite David with others from his world. But they were also putting themselves in serious danger. How many others? She asked. David studied the device carefully. At least 12 signals, scattered across the country. Some of them are strong, which means those people might already know what they are. Others are very faint, like they're still sleeping or unaware. Lisa made a decision that would change both their lives forever. Then we need to find them before anyone else does. But as she said those words, she noticed a black car in her rearview mirror that had been following them since they left the nursing home. The search for truth was about to become much more dangerous than either of them had imagined. 6 months had passed since that terrifying car chase. When Lisa and David realized they were being followed, they had managed to escape by abandoning Lisa's car and disappearing into the crowd at a busy shopping center. Since then, their lives had changed in ways neither of them could have imagined. They were no longer alone. Lisa stood in what used to be an abandoned research facility in the mountains of Colorado, but was now home to the most extraordinary group of people she had ever met. Through David's communication device, they had found 11 others like him, each with their own unique story of growing up feeling different and out of place. There was Rachel, a teacher from Texas who could communicate with electronic devices the same way David could. She had spent years thinking she was losing her mind. When computers seemed to respond to her thoughts, then there was Michael, a mechanic from Oregon who could fix any machine just by touching it. As if he instinctively understood how every part was supposed to work, each person they found had the same basic traits: enhanced physical abilities, the capacity to see and hear beyond normal human ranges, and most importantly, fragments of memories from another world. But each also had their own special gifts, as if they had been designed for different purposes. Lisa had transformed from a small-town emergency room doctor into something she never thought possible: a pioneer in understanding life from other worlds. She had documented abilities that challenged everything medical science thought it knew about biology and consciousness. The abandoned facility had become their sanctuary. David had used his growing abilities to restore the building's power and communication systems, while others contributed their own skills. Rachel had established secure internet connections that couldn't be traced. Michael had repaired equipment that had been broken for years. Together, they had created a place where they could explore their true nature without fear of discovery. But their greatest breakthrough had come just 2 weeks ago. Lisa was in the main laboratory, analyzing blood samples from the group, when David called her urgently to the communications center. He had been working with the device Mrs. Henderson had given them, trying to boost its signal strength. "Lisa, you need to see this," he said, his voice filled with excitement and emotion. On the screen that David had somehow connected to the alien device, symbols were appearing in patterns more complex than anything they had seen before. But these weren't random signals. They were clearly messages, and they were getting stronger. "Someone is trying to contact us," David explained. "Not from Earth, from home." Lisa felt chills run down her spine. "Are you sure?" David nodded, tears forming in his eyes. "I can understand parts of it. They're asking if we're safe. They want to know if we've found each other." Over the following days, with the help of the entire group, they managed to establish basic communication with David's home world. What they learned changed everything they thought they understood about why they were on Earth. David's people, who called themselves the Keepers, had not sent their children to Earth by accident or out of desperation. They had been monitoring human civilization for centuries, watching as humans developed technology and began to face challenges that threatened their planet's survival. The children, including David and the others, had been sent as bridges between the two worlds. They were meant to grow up among humans, learn to understand human nature, and eventually help both species work together to solve problems that neither could handle alone. "We were sent here to help," David explained to the group during one of their evening meetings. "Our people have technologies that could clean Earth's environment and cure diseases that humans haven't been able to solve. But they also need something from humans: your creativity, your ability to adapt, your different way of looking at problems." Lisa looked around at the faces of the group, each person representing a connection between two worlds, each carrying gifts that could benefit all of humanity. But she also knew they faced incredible challenges. The government agents who had been tracking them hadn't given up. In fact, their searches had become more organized and aggressive. The group had intercepted communications indicating that there was an entire government program dedicated to finding and studying people with unusual abilities. But 3 days ago, something unexpected had happened that changed everything. Lisa was working late in the laboratory when David rushed in with news that left her speechless. "Lisa, we just received a communication from the government program that's been hunting us. But it's not what we thought." "What do you mean?" David showed her a message that had come through their secure communication system. It was from Dr. Elena Rodriguez, the director of a classified government project called Bridge Initiative. The message was simple but extraordinary. "We know who you are, and we want to help. We've been preparing for this contact for decades. Please respond if you're willing to work together." Lisa stared at the message in disbelief. "It could be a trap." "Maybe," David agreed. "But what if it's not? What if there are humans who have been waiting for us, preparing to help rather than capture us?" After much discussion, the group decided to respond cautiously. What they discovered was that Dr. Rodriguez represented a secret international organization that had been monitoring signs of extraterrestrial contact for over 50 years. They had identified several individuals like David and had been protecting them from more aggressive government programs. The Bridge Initiative wasn't trying to capture or study them as test subjects. They were trying to facilitate the exact kind of cooperation that David's people had intended. When they sent their children to Earth. Last week, Lisa found herself in a situation she never could have. Imagine, she was sitting in a secure government facility, not as a prisoner or a person of interest, but as a consultant helping to establish the first official communication between Earth and another inhabited world. David sat beside her, no longer hiding his abilities but using them openly to help translate communications from his home world. Around the table were some of the most brilliant scientists and diplomats on Earth, all working together on humanity's first attempt at interstellar cooperation. The environmental restoration technology they're offering could reverse climate change within a decade, Dr. Rodriguez explained to the assembled group. In exchange, they want access to human art, music, and literature. They're fascinated by human creativity and believe it could help their own people solve problems they've been struggling with for generations. Lisa watched David as he facilitated the conversation between species, serving as both translator and cultural bridge. The shy, confused patient she had met in the emergency room 6 months ago had become one of the most important people in human history. But the story was far from over. That evening, Lisa and David stood together on the observation deck of the facility, looking up at the stars. The communication device was showing them that contact with David's home world was getting stronger every day. Soon, they expected to see the first ships arriving in Earth's solar system. "Are you nervous?" Lisa asked. David smiled, and she noticed that his unusual eyes seemed to reflect the starlight in ways that normal eyes couldn't. "I'm excited. For the first time in my life, I feel like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be, doing exactly what I was meant to do." Lisa thought about how much her life had changed. 6 months ago, she had been a doctor who thought she understood the limits of human biology. Now she was part of the team preparing humanity for its first contact with an alien civilization. "What do you think will happen when they arrive?" she asked. David was quiet for a moment, using the communication device to monitor signals from space. "I think both our species are about to learn that the universe is much more interesting than either of us imagined, and I think you're going to discover that your medical training was just the beginning of what you're capable of." As if responding to his words, the device in his hands began displaying a new message. David's expression changed to one of wonder and excitement. "Lisa," he said softly, "they're coming. The first ship will arrive in 3 months." Lisa looked up at the stars, realizing that everything humanity thought it knew about its place in the universe was about to change forever, and she would be there, alongside David and the others, to help both species take their first steps into a larger, more connected cosmos. The patient who had whispered to her that she couldn't be from Earth had been wrong about one thing. He was from Earth now, just as much as she was. But together, they were about to help both their peoples reach for something far beyond Earth, something that neither species could achieve alone.